With the accession of Henry II as king in 1154, hope in England was reborn. The population had been left downtrodden as the civil war between King Stephen and Henry's mother, the Empress Matilda, rumbled on for two depressing decades. However, in Henry, the English people could see an energetic and vibrant young king, ready to provide a return to the days of law and order of his grandfather, Henry I. A couple of years before becoming king, Henry had made a spectacular marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, the former wife of King Louis VII of France. Eleanor had not been happy with her marriage to the French king. Rumours had spread that Eleanor had an affair with her uncle during the disastrous Second Crusade, of which she and Louis had participated in. On their return to the West, Eleanor forced a divorce from Louis before rapidly marrying Henry, the then 18-year-old Duke of Normandy. Eleanor was over a decade older than her new husband. The match with Eleanor made Henry a dangerous rival for Louis, and the French king knew it, and even more so when Eleanor quickly gave Henry a son, William, who was born in 1153, something that she had failed to do for Louis. Henry and Eleanor's marriage would be one that would go down in history. By the time of his coronation, the week before Christmas of 1154, everything looked good for Henry. He had a wife who brought with her extensive territories, helping Henry to build his Angevin empire, and who would also produce for him a number of sons and heirs after William, and there was genuine enthusiasm for Henry's rule. Henry was crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Theobald of Bec, at Westminster Abbey, and Henry set to work almost immediately. One of Henry's first acts as king was to remove the swarm of mercenaries that had been hired by King Stephen during the anarchy. Many of these mercenaries had been invited over from Flanders. No doubt Henry wished to be rid of them, as they were a living and breathing reminder of the troubles that had gone before. The king made it clear, in no uncertain terms, to the mercenaries that they were to adhere to the departure date that was given to them, or their lives could be in jeopardy. Unsurprisingly, they did as they were told and exited the country without delay. There were other reminders of the Civil War as well. Castles and other structures had popped up all over the country over the last 20 years. Henry demolished a number of them, although kept some for strategic purposes. Henry proactively ensured that law and justice was kept throughout the land. The king kept a close watch on his judges and other law enforcers to ensure they abstained from corruption. The church also benefited, as Henry made sure, when vacancies arose, that they were awarded to honest members of the clergy. Under the watchful eye of the king and his chancellor, Thomas Becket, as well as the nobility whom Henry had managed to unify, England began to enjoy, as one chronicler put it, a second springtime. In the early months of his reign, Henry toured the country, granting extensive numbers of charters. In January 1155, Henry was at Oxford, where he oversaw a legal issue for a certain abbot named Bernard. From there he travelled northwards. He would gain a reputation as a king who not only travelled far and wide, but also who moved at a phenomenal pace as well. You had to be on your toes if you were part of his royal entourage. Not only did Henry travel long distances at an incredible rate, he also gave his entourage very mixed information when it came to travel arrangements. For instance, he would say that he and his people were to set off first thing in the morning, only for the king to stay in bed until midday. On other occasions, he would state that they were to set off later in the day, only for him to change his mind and set off early, leaving everyone else scrambling to catch up. It may well be Henry took some enjoyment out of creating such chaos. One chronicler accuses Henry of telling his entourage, when they were travelling, that they'd be staying overnight in comfortable lodgings, only to change plans again and, in the words of that same chronicler, leave his people to stay in a hovel not fit for a pig. Henry definitely enjoyed watching the arguments that followed as people fought over who slept where. Henry was definitely a man with a sense of humour. In February of 1155, Henry arrived at Nottingham. It's possible that he travelled there to investigate the mysterious death of the Earl of Chester. The man who was suspected of playing a part in the Earl's death had been residing at Nottingham. When he heard that the king was close at hand, the suspect fled. That same month, Eleanor gave birth to a son who is named after his father. This boy will be known to history as the Young King. This name came about after he was crowned co-king alongside his father in 1170. However, this would prove to be a mere symbolic gesture on the part of Henry II, and Henry the Young King, alongside his younger brothers, would gradually become increasingly frustrated under what they considered to be their father's rather suffocating hold over them. Henry then gained possession of two castles which had been held by the Earl of Hereford, who had previously been at odds with the crown. This would have been pleasing for the king, as it demonstrated that he was getting very much to grips with what had been a lawless country during the reign of Stephen. It may have only been a relatively small gain, but the symbolism would not have been lost on Henry. He then turned his thoughts to the future. He wanted to ensure the nobility's loyalty to his two sons, the infant William and the newborn Henry. So he held a council at Wallingford, where oaths of loyalty were taken. Things appeared to be going well for the new king, but matters would soon become more difficult for Henry. In May of 1155, a man by the name of Hugh de Mortimer goes into revolt against the king. The dispute drags on for a couple of months, which involves several sieges, until, at last, at Bridgenorth, a peace is agreed. Whilst the squabble with de Mortimer was going on, Henry received some bitter news. His oldest son, William, just a toddler, had tragically died. In an age of high infant mortality, this was not exactly unexpected, but a gut-wrenching blow for the king all the same. On a more coldly pragmatic note, William's death left the king with just one newborn son as his heir. To protect his dynasty, Henry would have to produce more sons to guard against the perils of childhood in this age. Henry's mother, the Empress Matilda, was still playing a significant role on the political scene. She warned her son against the risks of a campaign he planned to make in Ireland, one of potential conquest. It would have been a seriously risky move for a new king, and Henry duly continued his progress throughout England. Henry then spent the Christmas of 1155 in London, where he made plans to travel to France to pay homage to Louis VII for his French possessions. Whilst he is gone, England's administration is entrusted to Eleanor. Eleanor would require help with running the country, as, at the time of Henry's departure for the continent, she was pregnant again, and in the summer of 1156 she gave birth to a daughter named Matilda. Meanwhile, in France, the king was capturing territories that were rightfully his, but whose citizens were refusing to acknowledge him as their ruler. Henry celebrated Christmas of 1156 at Bordeaux, and alongside his mother, who appears to have joined him, he establishes an abbey at Cherbourg early in the new year. Both Henry and Matilda also grant a charter to an abbey in Argenton. In attendance of the confirmation of this charter is Chancellor Thomas Becket. Despite their potential rivalry, Henry and King Louis VII of France remain on good terms, for the time being at least, and Henry is granted possession of an abbey at Tours by the French king. Over a year after his departure for France, Henry finally returned to England in April of 1157, where his attentions are then turned northwards to Scotland, and their king, Malcolm IV, who relinquishes his claims to Newcastle and Carlisle. The Scots king agrees to meet Henry at Derbyshire and spends some time at the English court. Malcolm accompanies Henry to Chester, where he pays the English king homage. Wales, though, proves to be a little bit more problematic for Henry, but after some initial rebellions, Henry manages to subdue the Welsh and has homage paid to him by the Prince of the Northern Welsh. Nonetheless, Henry doesn't want to take any chances and fortifies his Welsh castles. 1157 was a good year for Henry, and in September it became even better with the birth of another son, this one called Richard. Once again, Henry had both an heir and a spare. However, little did the king know at the time, this baby would grow to be a force of nature. He would cause his father more than a little trouble before becoming one of the great warrior kings of his age. For the time being, Henry could be pleased with his work. His expedition to France had gone well, and the Scots and Welsh were kept in line for the time being, at the very least. He could also have no complaints about his queen either, who was producing him the required heirs. The first 3 years of Henry's reign had unquestionably been a total success.